In our second reading from St. Paul's letter to the Galatians, we heard St. Paul write, "When the fullness of time had come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to ransom those under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. When the fullness of time had come, God crossed the boundaries of time and was born into it through Mary. God transformed it by letting his love take on real flesh as one like us. God, in the person of his Son, made the most of his time here on earth as one of us, saving us from an eternity of time in death. St. Paul gives us reason to reflect on it as we begin making a New Year's worth of time on the calendar. Are we resolved to make the most of our time this coming year? Mary, the Mother of God, made the most of the gift of time God gave her on earth. Her time was lived well, as she lived humbly, lovingly, and graciously submitting to God's will, by being the Mother of God, so that the rest of us would have the chance of spending an eternity of time with God. Through this fullness of time mentioned by St. Paul, we have all been offered the chance to become adopted children of God. The time we have on earth as God's children is a gift to be used well, as God intends, and to be treasured, not something that we are to take for granted. It is interesting that some things don't change much over time, like the current practice of bringing in the new year with a lot of revelry, most often drunken revelry. This practice goes back to the time of the Roman Empire, 1st century, when the Romans honored the two-faced god called Janus, God who looked forward in time and looked back in time at the same time. They honored this god on New Year's Day with parties and overindulgence in everything imaginable. It was something that so scandalized St. Augustine, who recall had done it all, that he preached in one of his sermons, "Let them," referring to the pagans, "let them give New Year's gifts. You should give alms. Let them sing boisterous songs. You should open your hearts to the Word of God. Let them rush to the theater. You should rush to the church. Let them get drunk. You should fast." Now, I'm not suggesting that you don't have a nice New Year's Day dinner today, but I think it's interesting that contrast that St. Augustine makes between how we as Christians live this day as opposed to those who have no faith. And I'm glad that all of you are making the most of your time by celebrating this holy day in a holy way. I'm quite certain that you're not part of that crowd that stayed up real late partying last night. Since our God was born of Mary into our history in the fullness of time to offer us the fullness of life, may we always make the most of our time. Today, tomorrow, this next week, throughout this new year. I pray you have a happy and holy New Year.